And it looks like the recording is on.
I'm coming off recording and I'm coming off camera. Okay, I'm coming off camera.
Travis, or, okay, got it. Okay, great. And it looks like we have a number of members. And Ms. Camacho, are you ready?
Yes, ma'am.
Great. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I would like to call to order this work session of the Anchorage Assembly on FEMA reimbursements. It is Friday, December 3rd, 2021, and we are noticed from 11:20 to 12:20 today. Ms. Camacho, would you call the roll, please?
Ms. Allard,
Here.
Mr. Constant, Mr. Dunbar,
Here.
Ms. Kennedy, Ms. LaFrance,
Here.
Perez Verdilla,
Here.
Mr. Peterson,
Present.
Ms. Quinn Davidson,
Here.
Mr. Rivera, Mr. Weddleton, and Ms. Zalatel.
Here.
Thank you, Ms. Camacho. So this meeting today is a follow-up of a discussion from the Budget and Finance Committee meeting of October 21, 2021. And that discussion was based on a report that was issued from the CFO, Mr. Frisk, on containing September 30th data. And that report is available on the Budget and Finance Committee webpage. Today's presentation from the administration is available on muni.org under Assembly Work Sessions. Before we move on, I want to note that at that October meeting, Assembly members requested more detail about the FEMA reimbursement process and amounts that were submitted and pending and so on. And I have been asked by members to request a monthly report from the administration with data points to include, but not limited to, the amount of to date of expenses incurred, the amount to date submitted to FEMA for reimbursement, the amount to date committed by FEMA for reimbursement, amount to date in hand from FEMA reimbursement, any amounts denied for reimbursement by FEMA and the reason for that denial, along with the number of staff assigned to the FEMA response and recovery in finance and EOC, and the date through which funding for the EOC is secured. The report would not be necessarily limited to those data points, so I ask that members specifically, if not here, bring up which data points and information they would like to see in a report, but follow up in an email to the administration or to Ms. Camacho with what information you would like to see included. And with that, I will turn to Mr. Frisk.
Thank you, Chair LaFrance. I have with me today Alden Thurn, and as I indicated earlier, Alden is what I consider the subject matter expert when it comes to FEMA reimbursement. So my opening comments are going to be very brief, very short, and then we're going to put a slide presentation up that Ms. Camacho has agreed to drive for us. We're going to start by just quickly talking about FEMA reimbursement. Is currently 2 projects working, one of which is earthquake, and we've discussed this in the past. We're not going to discuss it today per se. We're just going to remind everybody at this point that the earthquake is a project-driven reimbursement process. So until we complete a project, we can't request reimbursement and obligation. So that in and of itself is the driving factor in that particular reimbursement channel. It's not a substantial amount of money that we're talking about. It is in this, it's 32.5 million, I believe is the total number, of which we've gotten 6, 7, 10, somewhere around there. But again, we're not talking about that. We want to concentrate on the COVID response into COVID reimbursement, because that's where the biggest amount of money is outlaid at this particular point in time and is a critical impact on our budget, not our budget, but our financial statements. So with that said, Ms. Camacho, if you wouldn't mind starting the presentation, and I'm going to turn it over to Alden Thurn.
And Mr. Frisk, I see that Mr. Dunbar is in the queue with a question.
Okay.
Mr. Dunbar?
Yeah. I'm sorry, Travis, and I know you want to focus on COVID. I just have a very specific question about the earthquake response, if I could ask that before we move on.
Absolutely, we can answer it. We just didn't, I wanted to preface that earthquake is not going to be in the slide presentation.
Right.
Okay,
So,
yes, we can answer a question on earthquake if you have one.
Yeah, just a very quick one. So I think one of the major projects is the SWS warm storage vehicle maintenance project. And so I have sort of two questions on that, because I know we can't get reimbursed until it's completed. So my first is, is that still on track for completion next year? I think it would be either late spring, early summer. And then second, I'm not really sure. So because it's an SWS facility, if for some reason we don't get fully reimbursed, do those is a difference made up by taxpayers or by ratepayers?
I don't have the answer to that. Let me step back. Let me start by saying I'm going to answer the last question first, which is I'm not sure if it's taxpayers or ratepayers that would pay. I'd have to check and with legal to determine that. So I can't answer that question right now. As far as the progress of the SWS project, Alden?
Yes, Mr. Dunbar. The project is approximately between 11 and 13 million. I know they've demolished the facility. Every time I drive to the dump, I have not seen them begin construction yet, but I'm sure it's that is the plan for them to be moving forward. We are on that one particular project on earthquake, because of the significant dollar amount, we have an opportunity to submit an advance payment or advance payment request. They actually submitted one for a little over 3 million a few weeks back, which covers their engineering and some site work kind of thing. So because that dollar amount is so significant from an earthquake perspective, we are going to try to seek some advance payments rather than waiting till the project is completely finished all the way at the very end. Does that answer your question on that?
Yeah, I mean, that's good to hear. I'm hopeful that we can get it done, this coming summer, and that is a significant enough chunk that it really does matter to the city. But yeah, I appreciate that answer. And if Travis, I don't know if you need to speak with Dan Zapay or someone else, or just trying to figure that out. I think it is a material question. I mean, it's a piece of critical infrastructure for SWS. They need it, and so it's sort of intuitively it should come out of the ratepayers. But I don't know if we are somehow on the hook for the broader general taxpayer. I think it's just a reasonable question for us to try to answer.
And all earthquake projects have been obligated by FEMA at the amount. So I'm not concerned about any of the earthquake projects being obligated, because they're all finished, all 104 of them. And if for some reason the project goes more than what was originally obligated, there is an appeal process to seek overages. So in the end, I have a pretty high confidence that those 104 projects, should we complete them and submit them all, we'll do pretty good in getting pretty close to 100% reimbursement for all of those. So I wouldn't be too concerned about that particular project.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. And just really quickly, Mr. Frisk or Mr. Thurn, the phrase obligated by FEMA, would you just explain what that means?
If you would allow me, in the very first slide of the deck, we're going to go through process, and I will refer to what obligated means as a part of that step.
Perfect. Thank you.
And if you're ready, if there's no more questions, we'll go into this particular process here. So I did want to spend a fair amount of time here because I know a lot of questions have come up with regards to what's the process, both in project creation with FEMA as well as the reimbursement side of it. So I'm going to spend quite a bit of time walking through the different steps here and so forth. So with regards to project creation, the municipality, are the first stage in creating a project in FEMA. We have to identify what that project needs to be. We have to create a scope, a timeline, a dollar amount. And we have to submit that into the portal. Once we submit that initial project into the FEMA portal, FEMA has an electronic tool that keeps all of the data with regards to reimbursements and projects in, and we're required to use that system. It's been in effect just before earthquake is when it got started. Once we submit that initial project, it goes to the state. They do a very quick review to ensure that they're in agreement, because historically the state's on the hook for 25% and the FEMA's on 75%. However, on COVID, the federal government's 100%. But that's why the state has a step in there. Once that's the state is finished with that step, they push it into the review process in FEMA, and where they will start evaluating all the information that we put into it. There's the very lowest level is the specialist that looks at that, and they look at all this data and everything that we put in there, and then they come up with, and has been historical, and we're specifically talking about COVID now throughout this presentation. They have put together a lot of questions. Requests for information, additional documentation, us answering a whole bunch of background questions with regards to the project and the transactions and so forth that we're doing. This is where a tremendous amount of time gets spent. We are then required to answer those questions, so we may have to go out to the EOC, OEM, different departments, and gather the appropriate answers to those questions. One of the question was pull 450 invoices. So it's not that they very well could be, simple yes, no questions. Some of them require weeks and weeks of work in order to be able to provide the appropriate reporting backup and documentation that FEMA is looking for. Once that lowest level person is satisfied that the project has been created and developed and there's an appropriate amount of backup, it then works through a multiple stage, multi-department within FEMA approval process. And they review it for a variety of different things to make sure that they're okay. At any one of those stages, they could provide additional questions or have additional concerns, which then come back to us and we have to respond to those things, such as environmental questions. Did you disturb a site? What was how did you do certain things? So a lot of those particular things happen. Another example would be like vaccines. What was the GPS coordinates of every site? So there's a tremendous amount of data and information that they require throughout this process. Did you want to add something?
I was just going to add that, and he actually hit the GPS locations of the testing sites. We actually got a request to provide the GPS locations of all the rental porta potties that we had utilized in projects. So this detailed information can drive very specific, and I'll turn it back over to Alden.
So
And let me just pause for one moment to note for the record that Mr. Weddleton joined us at 11:31. Thanks.
Perfect. And then once it's worked its way through approximately 6 to 8 different FEMA departments, it finally reaches the kind of the regional head. And if that person is satisfied, then they then send that entire project back to both the state and the municipality to say, all right, are we all in agreement with everything that's here, the dollar amount, the scope, all of the different details. So it comes all the way back down to us. And then we have to, look it over, validate it, and reapprove it. And if both the state and the muni are fine, then we say yes, and it goes back to FEMA. If the project is over $1 million, and pretty much every project on COVID is over $1 million, it then has to go to the U.S. Senate, where either Murkowski or Stevens has to review the project and give their approval that it's an acceptable project that they agree with. Once that process is done, it goes in what's called an embargo time period, which is another week to 10 days where it just sits there in limbo. And if anybody has issues with that, they can complain at that particular point. Once that embargo period is over, then FEMA will obligate the project. So Assembly Chair, this is the point where your question was, what does it mean by obligated? That's when FEMA finally says, within this particular project, with this scope of work, this dollar amount, this time frame, and these contracts and these transactions, we've all agreed that that work is eligible and a project has been formally created for that particular amount, and the project is obligated in FEMA. FEMA is then done with that particular project at that point in time. It then reverts to the state, who has to prepare an obligating award document, which is basically the grant award document. It's taking the state 4 to 6 weeks to prepare it once FEMA has obligated the project. And then they send that to us. We have to go through our signature process and we send it back to them, to the state. And now officially, we've now got an official project that's created, and we can then move into the reimbursement process, which is going to be what I'm going to talk about next. But before I do that, once a project is obligated, things may change. We may, especially with COVID, which is a never-ending project, the dollar amounts, the timelines, the scope might change. And if we have to do an amendment to an already obligated project, we have to do the exact process that I just said all over again for that particular process. So it's not a simple, hey, just give us $5 more million. You have to literally go through every single step all the way through and wait for that project to be amended. So that's the project, that's the process that we have in order to get a project created through FEMA and the state.
So, that's a question.
Any questions to that before I get into reimbursement?
Thank you. I don't see anyone in the queue, but I'm going to pause a couple seconds because I know some members are having some difficulty with turning off mute or unmuting.
Can I just note something, Madam Chair?
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Dunbar.
So I think we have, just for my colleagues' knowledge, we have Joe Klein here from the state who's involved in the state portion of this. So if there are questions with the state, I'd like to bring him into the conversation, but no need to right now, just to let my friends know that we have, our colleagues rather, know that we have someone from the state here as well.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar.
All right, so that pretty much, we're not to that slide yet. Please go back one. So that was basically the project creation, how a project gets created and what we have out there. Then we'll move on to the project reimbursement side. So the project creation side has really been driven by the EOC, the OEM department, and our contractor that they use. They're the ones who've really been focused on trying to get all of these questions and these projects created. The finance department has really been focused on our efforts on project reimbursement. And that's the process that I've been leading here for some time, both for earthquake as well as for COVID. So once the project is, we've signed the OAD and it's out there, then we can, technically we can be doing a reimbursement process. Now we, because of the timelines that we're talking about, we're always working on reimbursements. We're not waiting for an OAD to be finished. We are always in the process to be able to do that because it is another extensive, a very time consuming process. So we have to gather all of the backup information for every transaction that we're seeking reimbursement for. That is the contracts, the amendments, the purchase orders, the invoices, and a proof of payment out of our SAP system that we paid it for each and every transaction. And we are we're between 6,000 and 7,000 transactions right now for just COVID alone to be able to do that. Once we've gathered all those for each individual transaction, we currently send that to our contractor, who then gathers and summarizes all of that into the FEMA and state approved summary worksheets. So you have to basically summarize all these transactions and then come up to big totals, and you have to do that. So our contractor is currently doing that particular piece. Once they're finished with that review, they send it back to me so that I can validate that all the accounting entries and everything that are in there were audited and were matched up. We send that back to us, and if we're good, we sign it and we send that to the state, and our contractor loads that information into the FEMA portal so that all the backup is there. Once that is completed and the state has that, then they physically pull every transaction and all the backup in hard copy and prepare their files for themselves. They will not accept the electronic version. They want a hard copy, which is part of their requirement. So they have to then do that. They audit to make sure all of the backup is there that matches up to the summary worksheets. Once done, in this case, Joe would be the person who would be doing that, is satisfied, then they will put it through their multi-level review and audit process, which if gets approved, ultimately gets to their grants department. And then at that particular point, they would send us a wire transfer for the dollar amount that we were seeking reimbursement for that process. So I will stop there at that particular point. If there was any questions on reimbursement.
Okay, I'm not seeing any members in the queue.
Perfect. So that's kind of the process. Both the front end and the back end, and finance, as I mentioned, is really detailed on the back end. So what we're going to do now is start going through.
Wait, you've got queued questions coming in.
Okay.
Mr. Frisk, yes. First, we have Ms. Kennedy, and then we have Ms. Quinn-Davidson. Ms. Kennedy?
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is if you can put into perspective kind of the time period that a lot of this takes. I mean, I certainly understand that it's a lot of, just in the process, but how long can you typically expect some of this documentation and data finding and to actually take from, at least from the municipality and then from the state? Anyway, can you just give us kind of a sense of how long all of this takes to get done?
I'll do it real quick. I'll do it real quick. However, we do talk about it in the deck a little bit here. But our first project was obligated in COVID somewhere around April, May of 2020. And we sought an amendment to that around January. And we are still waiting and dealing with all of those issues. And like I said, I'll go into much more detail on this later on in the slide deck, but years. It just really depends on a project. I've had another project that we finally got approved in August that we got paid for in December. So on that particular process, you're looking at about a 4-month process from creation to payment, but on our more complex ones, it's taking months and months and months, if not over a year.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. Ms. Quinn-Davidson, and then Mr. Perez-Verdia.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and feel free to let me know if you're covering this later. I was just wondering what all the values are and at what stage they're at. So how much money do we need to get reimbursement for? How much have we put in a request at the state for? Like, where are all those numbers so that we can start to understand the bigger picture? And again, maybe you're going to talk about that later.
Perfect. No problem, Ms. Davidson. The entire rest of the deck talks about numbers, and I think that what you'll also see is that some of the items that we're providing were similar to what Assembly Chair LaFrance mentioned were some of your asks early on in this conversation. But the rest of the presentation, we'll talk about things from a summary level, and then we'll actually dive into the individual projects. So I do believe we'll probably get to your questions at that point.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Quinn-Davidson. Mr. Perez-Verdia.
Yep. My question is, I want to get a sense from your experience about, as we've been talking about FEMA reimbursements, I'm often hearing a bit of confusion as to often a surprise about, well, we thought we were going to get reimbursed for this, but we didn't, or we didn't know that was a requirement for reimbursement. And so we didn't do it the right way, or it wasn't processed the right way, which seems strange to me. Can you just speak to your experience with FEMA reimbursements in terms of, in most cases, we know what is required in order to get reimbursed? and are able to do that? And how often is that changing or a surprise or different from we thought, or too difficult to actually meet the requirements to be reimbursed? Because as I've been reading more and more on this, it seems to me that most often you know that in advance, and most of it is reimbursed, and there's some exception to that. Can you just speak to that, please?
Sure. This emergency is completely different than any emergency ever in the history of the world, and certainly as far as been FEMA since it's been created. Historically, you know, if it was like an earthquake, hurricane, fire, something like that, you go to the Papa G, they call it, which has all the things that here's what we approve, here's the process, here's being able to do that. COVID has been a continual, ongoing. Every month, something new happens. So they issued guidance, then they reissued guidance, which was more strict than the guidance they did. Then a new president came in and he said, no, I want things to be more open. So we've been on this roller coaster with regards to COVID that you really don't know what's eligible and what's not eligible. What you thought might have been eligible might eventually not be. And then, as I mentioned, we have a project here that it was pretty much uneligible or ineligible until August of this year, when they finally issued guidance and said, oh yeah, now we're going to cover that. So you had, you know, a year and a quarter where we already had spent a whole bunch of money thinking it was going to be fine, only to find out that it was not going to be eligible. Then we waited, and then they changed their minds, and then it became eligible again. So COVID is a one-off. And that has been the huge challenge as we ebb and flow through eligibility things and things getting extended, that we've had, you know, what we may have thought was eligible to begin with has morphed over periods of time. And that historically does not happen with FEMA type projects. Hopefully that answers it.
So,
It did.
Assemblymember Perez, excuse me, just for a second, Assemblymember Perez-Verdia, just to caveat on that is that not only can FEMA change their mind and pay you a year and a half down the road, but they can also change their mind and say, no, we want the money back. That specifically was discussed in the audit committee meeting with Assemblymember Rivera was in attendance, and so was Assemblymember Allard. Joy Mariner, the BDO partner who presented our audit findings to that committee, specifically talked about that when you're dealing with FEMA, it's wonky because they can pay you, but then they can also take it back. So just to be aware, there's that possibility as well. Not only can they delay you in paying you, but they can pay you and then say, we changed our mind. That's not an acceptable payment, and we want the money back.
And we had a situation where we sought reimbursements for something that was originally eligible, only to find out several months afterwards, they said contact tracing is now in another grant. So we had to take all those expenditures that were in FEMA back out and put them in a different grant. And in one case, we received reimbursement for something because of that situation, and we had to pay the state back because it became eligible by another funding source after we had already submitted this. So pretty much anything that could happen in a FEMA project has happened with COVID because of the continual ongoing time frame that it envelops.
Thank you. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I also want to state the state as well has changed their guidance to us. So we've had to do things a certain way, and then all of a sudden they say we've been audited, so now we've got to do things differently. So, you know, we've gone down paths and then had to start back over again as well. So there's been a lot of change on both sides.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a follow-up comment.
Sure.
I want to just differentiate though between the complexity and the confusion and the challenge of this, which is clear, and the idea that Mr. Frist said about not paying us. And so my understanding is that's rare, that this idea of them deciding to change their mind and then not pay us is rare. Now, the idea of their changing their mind and us having to file it in a different way and do things in a different way and go through this whole confusing process seems to be more the norm. But I think the thing that I want to just emphasize I want to make sure that the public generally knows that FEMA generally provides guidance in terms of what they expect, and then they pay you back. And even if they change their guidance and you have to do it in a different way, then you file it that way, then they pay you back. And so I think that the concern I have is that we're sending messages out there that there's a highly likelihood that we're not going to get paid back. And I don't believe that that's true. I believe that in most cases we are paid back, and the cases when we're not are rare. So that's the piece that I think we need to make sure we're being really clear about. Thank you, Madam Chair.
And in my future slides here, which I'm hoping we can move on to here quickly, we have some sample or examples of areas where we're having some challenges.
Yeah, thanks.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Perez-Verdia. I think we can go ahead and move on now, Mr. Thurn, Mr. Frisk.
Perfect. Let's go to slide 3, and I'm going to go through 3 and 4 pretty quickly.
Madam Chair.
Actually, Ms. Quinn Davidson is in the queue. Ms. Quinn Davidson?
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. Thank you. I'll try to make it quick. I wanted to say thank you to Mr. Perez-Verdia bringing that point up, because I think, yeah, just agree. It's confusing, right? FEMA is a part of a big bureaucracy, and it can be confusing. And they might say, oh, you need to reimburse the state, and then we're going to give you a grant, but that's revenue neutral. And so I just want to be careful that we're portraying to the public that, and I want you to affirm this is true, so tell me if it's not, that FEMA generally reimburses when they say they will. And so that's, I guess, part 1. And then part 2 is I'd like to hear from you all what happens if FEMA doesn't reimburse us, and is there another way to recover that money? And if you want to cover that later, that's fine, but I just want that to be in the queue. Thanks.
Yeah, the first part of that, I think we'll cover about the additional payment options later in the conversation. But the key part of the whole conversation is FEMA has to approve an obligated project for those expenditures. So if they haven't approved it at that stage and a project's been created, then reimbursement doesn't happen. The challenges that we're having right now in certain areas, which we'll talk about here in more detail if we can get to them, are in areas where FEMA has not given their approval to obligate a project for those related expenditures. And I'll get into some detail about that at the very end here. But if they obligate a project, I'm pretty confident we'll get ultimately reimbursed. We're having significant challenges and difficulties getting them to obligate projects based upon the expenditures that are in those projects. And like I said, if I could get through these couple of slides, I'll give you the real life examples at the very end here that I think you're probably referring to.
Yeah, that's a really helpful distinction. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Okay, so these next two slides are real quick because they're going to make up the information for the next one. But what I put together here is a slide that just shows how the expenditures have been posted in SAP on a monthly basis. And what you can kind of see on here is, you know, the emergency got started, so you're spending a little bit there, then it starts ramping up as you do more testing. December was obviously a big month because they're trying to get all the expenditures that were applicable to 2020 in. But you can see, you know, recently we've been averaging, you know, in between that $3.5 to $6 million per month expenditures. And also note that I was only able to, I pulled November 12th information for November. So that month is a little short from compared to what it probably the actuals were, but we used that in order to prepare the slide deck. But this is just our historical expenditures on a monthly basis. If we could go to the next slide. This is the slide that we put together here where we're trying to show some historical information on when how much we've requested and when we received it. So the dark blue is how we've put together reimbursement requests. You can see that no reimbursement requests were put in for the first half of the emergency. The first one went in October. And then we started getting money at the very end of December, and that's what that green color is. I came on assisting with the non-labor around January, And we made it an effort, as you can see, to try to get caught up. So we've submitted a fair amount of things, and we've been receiving what's in the green here. So this is just kind of gives you a monthly impact of how we've been submitting and how we've received it. The next slide is really the summary, which we'll probably focus on more than anything else, which is just taking the information that was on the prior two. And the key here is the black line. That's the cumulative expenditures. So everything that was on slide 3 on a monthly basis, this shows you graphically how we have increased and are near 90 million for our expenditures and how that happened. We put the received and requested on the very top lines that were on slide 4. But the difference one, which is, I think, very visual right now, is the cash outlay. So what that is showing on that kind of yellow color is the amount that we have expensed that we have not been reimbursed for yet. And you can see that that's in that more than between 55 and 60 million dollars out there. So that's what the graph is attempting to show you. The difference between the black line and the yellow would be the cumulative amount that we have been reimbursed to date. And we did put a reimbursement that came in yesterday in that particular calculation. But this really, I think, is a kind of a visual representation of how we've been expending on COVID for non-labor, how we've been getting our reimbursements, and where we're at with regards to how much is currently outstanding that we still have work to be done. And that could be either getting the projects obligated so we can get reimbursed, or on the other side of it, actually still pulling the backup data that needs to be pulled in order to even create reimbursement requests. But I will stop here, but I think this slide really is probably encompasses a lot of the data and questions that you had had on where we are from the beginning to now, and how our expenditures are going, and how the reimbursements to date have been. Yeah, so
Go ahead, Mr. Dunbar.
I'm sorry, was that for me, Madam Chair, or someone else?
Yes, that was for you, Mr. Dunbar. Mr. Dunbar is in the queue.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So Alden and Travis, you want to weigh on this too. So in the presentation we got back from Fitch, or the report we got back from Fitch, they stated that our municipality had communicated to them, and they put in their report that we expected to get reimbursed 95% from FEMA for the earthquake and for COVID. Now, I understand that some of those funding sources might have changed to other kinds of grants. I have no strong preference of whether money comes from FEMA or comes through a different grant, so long as the municipality is receiving it. But that 95% number that Fitch relayed to us, but got from us as well, is that still our feeling that we will be reimbursed 95%? It might take a while, but 95% of what we have outlaid, we will get reimbursed by FEMA.
This is Travis first. Thank you, Mr. Dunbar, through the chair. What was communicated in the presentation was that we felt highly confident that we would receive 95% reimbursement of eligible expenses. Okay, not what we've outlaid. Okay, what we are what would be deemed eligible are, in this case, obligated. Okay, again, you give a 5% buffer in there in case they want to pull money back and say go to a different grant, but the communication was eligible reimbursements, not expenditure outlay. It just to qualify that.
Okay, and is that eligible as we see them, or eligible as ultimately FEMA sees them? And sort of how do we know the difference there? Because presumably we are only making outlays that we think, or almost only making outlays that we think will get reimbursed. I mean, we've been trying to be very careful with mass care to say this is mass care, it is eligible. It is not some other general homelessness program, right? So yeah, I guess, what do we see as the gap between what we believe to be reimbursable and what FEMA believes to be reimbursable?
Slides.
I think we're going to get into the next couple slides. And again, my statement is that we are 95% confident that we will receive full reimbursement for eligible expenditures based on FEMA's determination, not on mine and not on anybody else's.
So, okay, but then that to me seems like kind of a statement without meaning then. I mean, if we're 95% confident in something, but we also have no confidence as to what will be deemed eligible or not, then that to me is a concern. I mean, what percent of our outlays do we believe to be FEMA eligible? I guess that's the question.
Well, Mr. Dunbar, again, I've been on the job for 5 months. I've been reviewing everything. I've been reviewing, documents from FEMA on what they determine eligible. The fact that they are silent on congregate sheltering, which is part of the mass care overarching umbrella. It's concerning to me, and that's my job. My job is to be conservative. It's not to say, oh yeah, we're going to get paid. I'm concerned. I'm concerned because I look at a document that's dated September of 2020 in which FEMA went silent on congregate sheltering. Okay. I also look at around and the entire country, and I'm looking at it and I'm going, okay, we have a shelter that has been propped up since March, that's still propped up and running, and yet everybody, all the other counties and municipalities and such throughout the country stop theirs. So my job is to be conservative. It's not to be aggressive or anything. I'm telling you, and I have said this, I'm concerned about reimbursement for the sheltering part of this whole equation. Okay, and when we get farther into these slides, I think it'll become pretty apparent of why I'm concerned. Okay, I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know if they're going to say, yeah, we'll pay everything. I don't know that, and none of us do. So we need to be cautious in this aspect. We can't just arbitrarily say we're going to get reimbursed for everything we're spending. And okay, and subsequently, I can't sit here and say we're not getting paid for anything. Okay, all I can say is we're going to get reimbursed for whatever FEMA determines is eligible for reimbursement. I have 95% confidence that we will get all that money back.
Okay, and at this point, thank you, Mr. Frisk. Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. We have less than 20 minutes left, and I have 5 members in the queue. Ms. Kennedy, Ms. Zalatel, Mr. Perez-Verdia, Ms. Quinn Davidson, and Ms. Allard. So we'll go ahead and go through the queue. Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I mean, I'll be brief because really, I think we're finally really getting to the crux of the issue here. So I'm definitely interested in what the rest of the slides will basically point out. But I think we're really failing to recognize that we are truly at the mercy of FEMA and their determinations as to what is eligible, not ours and not our hopes. So anyway, I think that's really starting to paint a different picture. So I'll reserve any other comments or questions until we see the other slides. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. Ms. Zalatel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think first and foremost, what we've stood up is mass care. It is not shelter. It is an important distinction. It is in response to COVID-19. And to not say that, I think undercuts the argument that it's FEMA reimbursable and it needs to be always called mass care, because municipality right now has not stood up shelter. It stood up mass care in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. If it's not in the next slides, I would like a breakdown of those FEMA those expenditures where we don't think that they could potentially be FEMA reimbursable, to somehow code those differently so that we can see that and then get the explanations for that and what we're relying on. Because when I see these historical non-labor expenditures versus the FEMA reimbursements, if there's a portion there that the administration doesn't believe would be reimbursable, I would like to see that overlaid on this, because that would give me a more complete picture of what your concern is. And then I would have an opportunity to better analyze that concern. It's hard to see it within the complete picture right now. Thank you.
Hang tight. Madam Chair, can I do one thing real quick with Assemblymember Zeltel, please?
Yes, please go ahead.
So Assemblymember Zeltel, I want to be clear that what is being said about congregate and non-congregate sheltering, that is FEMA verbiage as well. When you look at FEMA, and I did because you pointed this out, hey, it's mass care. Okay, it's mass care. I went out, FEMA's definition of mass care, the first words right after the definition mass care is congregate sheltering. It's a synonymous word that they use. I mean, we're using mass care, but again, their reference is congregate sheltering and non-congregate sheltering. So I just want to be clear here. This is not me making this up as I'm going. These are the verbiage that is being used during discussions.
Thank you, Mr. Frisk. And we have 3 other members in the queue, but Ms. Zalatel, did you want to add or have another question that you want to come back to on this?
Just a brief comment, which is that mass care is shelter, sure, congregate and non-congregate sheltering in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. It is not sheltering that is our homeless response network. And that is the important distinction. We are not replacing the homeless response network sheltering. We are sheltering in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. And that is why mass care is an important term. Thank you.
And we are definitely going to fight and provide the backup and rationality and information that we can for, with regards to all of these charges that we have expensed for these particular efforts, regardless of how we want to call it. We're not giving up the fight. The slides in the end will show you how we're trying to address these types of things. But please just remember, ultimately, it will be FEMA's decision on whether or not they're going to approve our argument. And there's an appeal process, and there's a variety of things that we can bring our legislators in and so forth. But ultimately, it will not be our decision. We will try to justify it and why it was COVID related and why we did the things we did. But the questions that we're getting are all that we're needing to provide backup for are along these lines, which then FEMA will take, and they will then make their decision, yay or nay, based upon the backup. And they'll either say, yes, we agree, it is related, and we're going to obligate a project for that, or they're going to disagree and say, no, we don't, and then we'd have to go through the appeal process. But we're getting the last couple of slides. I figured this was going to be what we were going to be talking about. I've gone into some details of where the areas are that we're having issues trying to get FEMA to buy into.
Thank you, Mr. Thurn. And I'll go through the queue here, and I'm going to go next to Ms. Allard since she hasn't spoken yet, and then to Mr. Perez-Verdia, and then to Ms. Quinn-Davidson, and then hopefully to the rest of your presentation. Ms. Allard?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Obviously, we need to get through these slides, but we all do want that reimbursement. But at the same time, we are setting a precedence by having the longest running mass care shelter, homeless shelter, and some of us don't believe it falls under the COVID-19. So I'd be very interested to see what FEMA says about that. And that's all I have. And any other additional questions, I'll go to the administration later. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Allard. Mr. Perez-Verdia?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll try to be correct. I mean, obviously, this is a battle of narratives, and it's a really frustrating one because the orange on here are expenditures that you expect to be reimbursed. That is why they're on this chart. And so, yes, it is a lot of outlay of funds. There is a risk involved in working with FEMA. We got it. I mean, that's clear. But I'm trying to understand the intention here. Is the intention to stop spending money to address the global pandemic in our community? or just to remind us that we need to be more conservative and be more aware of what's going on. But what's hard for me to understand here is that this chart in itself says you have identified these cash outlays as things that we believe are going to be reimbursed by FEMA, and FEMA generally has given us the guidelines, and so it is our expectation that we will be reimbursed by these. Yes, there's risk. Yes, it is a large outlay of cash, but I'm trying to understand beyond the risk involved and beyond the caution involved, what the narrative that you're trying to create here. And so that's the concern I have. You don't need to respond to me, but I'm continuously frustrated about this because I understand the information, but I'm continuously frustrated by the attempt at trying to sort of motivate us to function differently by addressing the issues in our community. And that's the underlying conversation that is happening here that is concerning to me. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Perez-Verdia. And then we'll go ahead and go on to Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to start by thanking Mr. Perez-Verdia because my comments are really in line with his. And I guess what I want to say is that, what was presented to Fitch was that we expected to get reimbursed for 95% of total costs. And right now we're hearing a new word added, which is eligible. And so my question is, are you making that distinction now because you believe we are spending money that is not eligible for reimbursement? And we shouldn't be doing that. Right? We should only be spending money that we believe is eligible. So there should be no real difference between what you said to Fitch and what you're saying now, despite the fact that you're alluding there is. And so I have a problem with the narrative as well. And I look forward to learning more about the amounts because I think that's an important piece of this puzzle as well.
Thank you, Ms. Quinn Davidson. And Mr. Thurin and Mr. Frisk, if you want to go ahead and continue with your presentation.
Perfect, and I'll go through the next few slides. If you can go to number 6, please, Desiree, quickly, because I think most of your questions are relying on the last 2 slides. So employee screening was an area where that I brought up that the government was not going to pay for. They finally changed on that in August of this year. So that just shows you how long it took, why we had these expenses out there. We did actually get reimbursed for those yesterday. So this is a completed project, and this was employee screening for AWU and solid waste, and it's completely done, paid for, and everything. So no need to ask any questions about this one. If we want to go on to the next one. Community testing obviously is one of our largest outlays, and also where we're most successful in getting reimbursement. FEMA has currently obligated to us $36 million. We've received a little over $26 million. We have the capability of getting another 9.7. We are waiting for Joe to send us the OAD any moment now, which would allow us to process our most recent amendment. And they are holding a $5.3 million pending amount, which would then leave us only $4 million left. But we are as current as we possibly can on seeking reimbursement for community testing. If the state is hopefully able to get us our money by the end of this month, we will have received almost $31.6 million in community testing reimbursement. This is the project where we have been most reimbursed for and have the least amount of issues with FEMA. So we are current and we're getting money, and this is where the vast majority of the money we're receiving is coming from. Let's go on to the next one, please. Next one is vaccinations. This is a project that we have been working on for at least 6 or 8 months now. We have not been able to basically move this project forward with FEMA. Because of the amount of questions and reporting requirements that they're requiring to have us prepare and have for their review. We do have a project created for it, approximately $5 million. We're pulling that information as quickly as we can to try to answer it, but we are still several months away from this project being obligated and then getting the obligating award document from the state in order to be able to be paid for. We're having challenges providing all of the detailed backup that FEMA is requiring in order for them to approve and obligate a project. We have a reimbursement of 3 million already created. We haven't submitted it yet to the state because we're still so far away from getting this project obligated. But this project has been a challenge for us, and this is kind of where we're at. The next one is going to be our sheltering thing, which I know is going to be a lot of conversations. But if there's questions on vaccines, I can try to answer it.
Thank you, Mr. Thurn. Ms. Zelatel?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think this vaccination slide really illustrates kind of what I was trying to get at earlier, is we know that there are some challenges. If those challenges could be highlighted, I don't have any doubts that we're going to get reimbursed for vaccinations. It's been pretty clear from, the federal government that that's the case. So what I would like to have a better understanding of, what are those challenges? And is it in some way that we either implemented the program? Is it just it's a lot of data? So if we do another update, which I'm hoping we'll do these somewhat regularly, if that information could be added where we haven't yet submitted a project, or because there are those challenges, it would be really good to know them, because I think it adds really important context to the status of a particular reimbursement project. Thank you.
This particular one has a couple of challenges. One, we did so many different sites and so many pop-ups and takedowns. And as we've already mentioned, they want GPS coordinates, and did you disturb the ground? And every single one of those, we have to provide a litany of different answers to. So that's a challenge, because we have done a lot of different flexibility. The bigger challenge is we have to basically report all the shots that we gave, to who we gave them to, and because there's a 10% requirement on lower socioeconomic, that we delivered them. We put our sites in the right parts of town, and we got to the right populations and so forth. And the data that is encompassing that has been a significant challenge amongst the different systems and software to be able to pull, to provide the reports that FEMA is requiring us, and for them to be able to see in order for them to ultimately approve this project. So
Thank you. I appreciate that. I would like it reflected in the slides so that I can refer back to it and have that knowledge on an ongoing basis. Thanks for the update.
Thank you, Ms. Zelatel. We have 3 minutes left. I'm going to suggest we go over by 5 because we have a 10-minute buffer until our next work session. And so we have Ms. Quinn Davidson next, followed by Mr. Presverdia. Ms. Quinn Davidson, or actually just Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Oh, thanks, Madam Chair, and thank you for these slides. And also, I neglected to say at the beginning, thank you to both Mr. Frisk and to Alden for doing all this work. I mean, it's incredibly tedious, I'm sure, and frustrating. And so we really do appreciate it, even if we're asking all of these questions. We're just trying to figure out what's going on and learn. So, but I did want to ask for both, I guess, vaccinations, and it could be relevant for testing as well. Is there an insurance element to that? Is it possible that private insurance for folks who have it might reimburse some of that and you wouldn't have to go to FEMA?
We didn't collect it.
We didn't, we didn't, I don't think all of this was free for the people that were doing testing and so forth. So, and vaccinations have been free as well. So I don't believe anybody has gone to their private insurance that if they've used a municipal, and both testing and vaccines have been paid for, and this is the FEMA part, but we've had ELC grant too, which has done both of those. So we have a variety of different efforts across the community that to do both testing and vaccinations. But these FEMA things, there were no charges to the public, and we're just seeking basically it's the vendor costs that we're running these programs is what we're seeking reimbursement for.
So to caveat onto that, Ms. Quinn Davidson, is that I don't believe, and I don't hold my feet to the fire on this, but I don't believe we collected the private insurance from the individuals we provided the service to in order to get reimbursed from an independent insurance company.
Yeah, I pretty much can agree with that as well.
Can I just ask, Madam Chair, do you believe that you might look to insurance in the future, or I'm just trying to think of ways, to be creative about getting this money.
That would be a policy decision that would be made at a different location than my office. We're just talking about us getting money back from FEMA at this point. As far as whether that's an option, I'm going to defer to the health department and the municipal manager and the mayor at this point.
Madam Chair, can I respond to that?
Sure, go ahead, Mr. Presverdia.
So I had a conversation with the health director yesterday about this, and I was told that we did collect the health insurance information, and that the vendor we were using was not willing or not able to bill health insurance, and that the new vendor we are moving towards is going to do that, and that is the intention moving forward, is that that when we can, we will be billing private insurance. He also characterized the new vendor as more, quote, FEMA compliant. And so I think that's something else we need to investigate is how does this affect our ability to be reimbursed by FEMA? Does us billing insurance make it more likely, which is what he had indicated, or does it harm us? So I think that's more information that we needed to gather on this. But my understanding is that we have been collecting insurance information. We have not been billing, but that is the intention moving forward, that we will be billing for insurance, and that in some ways makes us more FEMA compliant. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Presverdia. I think that's an area to follow up on. Mr. Dunbar?
Thank you, Madam
Assembly
Chair.
Member Presverdia, as I indicated, I wasn't sure. I said, don't hold my feet to the fire, but I didn't think we collected it. I don't know. So if you're saying that Joe has said we have collected that information from people we provided these services for, that's great. Thank you for letting me know.
Thank you, Mr. Frist. Mr. Dunbar?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm just wondering, have other cities been able to get reimbursed by FEMA for vaccinations?
The information that I've gotten is that, I mean, vaccinations are definitely an eligible reimbursable thing, but I have heard from our contractor who deals with several entities across the United States. The reporting requirements have been a consistent issue across all applicants, and for the most part, FEMA has made everybody jump through excessive amounts of hoops and provide the reporting that was in the guidance before the projects move forward. So I do not believe we are alone on this particular topic. What I'm hearing is this is a pretty consistent thing that's happening out there.
Great. I mean, that's frustrating, but it's good to know that we aren't in a different position than most other cities, and that everybody is expecting to get reimbursed eventually, because, I mean, this is obviously clearly within, the response to the disaster. So thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you,
President.
Mr. Dunbar. And then we'll go to Ms. Allard, and then I would like to give the administration opportunity to complete their slide deck. Ms. Allard?
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is directed to the administration. Travis, has there been any indication on why this issue hadn't been, you've only been in the administration, like the administration only came on board less than 6 months ago, right? So is there any reasoning or any indication or anything you have received of why this wasn't addressed and handled by prior administrations and why we're waiting now?
Through the chair, Ms. Allard, I'm not exactly sure how to answer the question. I mean, what I can tell you is that coming into the office on the 1st of July, coming up to speed as quick as possible. I think if we were to go backward and look at the slides, you would see that, and Alden can testify to this right here, is that the things that I have requested is that we do at least try to get monthly reimbursement requests out through the system to get them flowing, to get our money flowing back. We've instituted changes in the way we handle an OID, which is obligating award document. When I got here, it was determined that sometimes those obligating award documents would take 6 to 8 weeks to make their way through the municipal signing process before it went back to the state. And at this point, when we know there is a obligating award document that hits our first office, a communication goes out to be on the lookout. And if a document doesn't move within 24 hours, we ping the individual that had it last to ensure that they move it forward. We've then now compressed that OAD signature process within the municipality to about a week to 10 days versus 6 to 8 weeks, which has helped expedite the process of getting money back. So we've taken yes.
Thank you. So what you're saying is that you've been proactive, doing your job full steam ahead. That's what I want to hear. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Ms. And in the interest of time here, well, I just want to note for the record, Mr. Constant has joined at 12:24 p.m. I think this is going to take us until the start of our next work session at 12:30. Go ahead, Mr. Sen.
Do you want me to continue, Assembly Chair?
Yes, please.
Okay.
It's in work sessions. If we run over, we just have the next one scheduled at 12:30, and I want to make sure we leave time for that. But yes, please continue.
All right, and I apologize because obviously the next two slides are probably the most talkative ones, and I didn't plan on them to be quite that way. But if we can move to slide 9. So this is our sheltering project, which we call it sheltering because it's the majority portion of that. But this is what was our original project. Currently, the project has $4.5 million obligated. It was obligated well over a year and a half ago. We've been reimbursed for just under $3.9 million. We would have $700 million left if we had eligible expenditures. We have submitted an additional $9.6 million in reimbursement requests, but we are obviously way over the amount that's been obligated. This has been our very difficult project, and you've already asked many, many questions about it. But this project was originally scoped to cover all reimbursements related to the EOC, the health department, personal protective equipment, both congregate and non-congregate related expenditures from the very beginning to no ending date. There were some grants, as I mentioned, that expenditures were put in here that we had to pull back out, like contact tracing. So that's just a comment there. We have had an amendment to this project to obligate more, basically sitting at FEMA for a year now, where we have had a never-ending list of questions related to expenditures that are in there. And their major areas of concern are all expenditures that we charged to COVID that were related to the MOA's decision to have employees work from home. We have charges in our request that cover computers, software, everything when the MOA said, hey, please, to help with COVID, work from home. That's never been in an eligible FEMA guidance document, so we're having significant challenges there. They are major questions where we did studies on economics, on what the economy was going to happen because of that. So those expenditures have been put out there. All congregate sheltering expenditures incurred after 9/15 have been questioned. The guidance came out that we referred to earlier that said everything was eligible to begin with, and then they came out and said, here's what's eligible beginning 9/15 forward, and congregate sheltering was absent that document. So FEMA has taken a stance that those charges may not be eligible, but we have to justify them because the memo didn't speak to them. Additionally, non-congregate sheltering expenditures that were incurred prior to 4/17 were not FEMA eligible as well. And that has, so all of these kind of charges have been encapsulated in this particular project, which we have continually been trying to resolve and answer and so forth. And we were just not getting anywhere with them. So I made a decision in October that in order to try to free up things that everyone knew was eligible, and not be held up by things that we were being challenged with in some of these other areas, we have decided to break this project up into 5 separate projects to try to keep them moving. And I'm going to ask if I can go to the next slide first before we ask questions. If you could go to slide 10, please. These are how we have broken up the project. So project 1 is now going to be considered a minimum of 5 projects. It's 5 projects right now. We have the revised existing project that was out there to begin with, which is going to be everything that we have for the EOC, Health Department, PPE, and non-congregate sheltering after 4/16. All of those expenditures up to the end of the year, and we will include congregate sheltering that go through 9/15, because there was guidance that said that that would be eligible. We are currently trying to provide the last couple of pieces of information on that. We've agreed with FEMA on the $10.778 million number that we've fully documented, and they're waiting for a couple of memos from us, and then they will route that project through. So we come to an agreement with that lower level person I was telling you about, that they believe what's left in this project that we did not pull out are eligible in there. We then are going to have to create a separate congregate sheltering project for all expenditures that happen after 9/15, and we're trying to develop that project right now. Additionally, we're going to create a separate project for all of these expenditures that are listed there that started in 2021. We may go, they're asking us to not do an entire year. We may do a 6-month, a 3-month. We really haven't decided on an end date yet, but we're trying to do that. And we've got an agreement with the state that the non-congregate sheltering that FEMA will not cover prior to 4/17, the state will pick up via a grant. So we put those expenditures into a separate one, and we'll have a different funding source for that. What's left is we've created a project, it's kind of a holding bucket, so to speak, where there are expenditures that are eligibility concerns, where we do not want them to be muddled into those other projects holding up our thing. When you have a project that has everything, one transaction could hold up everything. So now we're going to try to break these into smaller segments, more centered around specific things, where we are hoping that some of the projects will be able to move forward quickly, and the more challenging ones that we need to provide the information and fight for, like we're going to do, will be on their own, and we will, not be holding up the other ones. So this is the direction we're at right now, and I'm sure there are lots of questions, but I did want to try to get through this. But this is the problem child, so to speak, of the projects that we've been dealing with.
Madam Chair, just additional piece of information for the group is that Alden and I talked about it. We did have a specific reimbursement request in, and we determined from FEMA that there was probably anywhere from $500,000 to $750,000 worth of expenditures that were in questioning, that were holding up the reimbursement. We decided to pull that dollar amount and those line items out of the package in order to keep the money moving forward and get the money reimbursed to the municipality. And then we set that aside in this last bucket. We'll fight that battle, but we're not fighting it today. We're fighting it in the future, but we want to get as much money flowing back into our budget, our coffers and our accounts as quickly as possible.
Thank you, Mr. Frisk, and thank you, Mr. Thurn. So we are 12 minutes over our scheduled time. I think it's clear we're going to need another work session or an ongoing conversation on this topic. However, for today, I want to ask members, since this topic is very clearly related to the topic of our next work session, namely the bond ratings, I just want to ask members if the preference is to continue on and move through the queue and go for like another 10 minutes. Is there any objection to continuing on for another 10 minutes or until 12:40? Okay, I'll go ahead and move through the queue, and then after that, I believe we're going to need to adjourn and move on to our next work session. So I have Mr. Dunbar, Ms. Zalatel, and Mr. Constant. And actually, let me go to Mr. Constant first, since he's not yet been in the queue. Mr. Constant?
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So, okay, good. My question is, what's the strategy for engaging the congressional delegation on the process? Because my experience is, if they're well aware of this in as much detail as possible, they can help to expedite the process.
Thank you for that question. I'll go ahead and answer it. This is Amy Domboski, the municipal manager. So we are in constant communication with the federal delegation. We do have lobbyists as well that are in communication with the federal delegation. And it's my understanding that the mayor actually, just yesterday I had the conversation, the mayor is going to be inviting each of the members of the federal delegation to sit down and talk to him, not only about the port, about major infrastructure projects that we're concerned about, but also about reimbursement.
Thank you, Ms.
Thank
Domboski.
you. That's essentially a good answer. I'd like to be looped into the conversations after the fact so I get an update on how the plan works, because my experience again is FEMA will drag their feet until the delegation tells them, hey, we're watching.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Mr. Dunbar has asked to be removed from the queue, so we'll go to Ms. Zalatel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is in line with my prior request, but where there are potential challenges, if those challenges could be spelled out, and I think this actually coincides really well with Mr. Constant's question, so that we're fully briefed on them and we can make sure we're doing a concerted effort, both with the delegation and understanding what potential challenges, whether they're data, whether there just is additional work to be done. And then I would in particular like to know on the eligibility concern scope, if next time we meet on this, which I'm hoping it's monthly at this point, if those can be detailed, if that scope can really be detailed and we can drill down on that. So again, the full picture. I'm hearing concern, but I would really like to drill down on each of the concerns, know where the concern stems from. And I know it's more work, but you know them, we don't. And so I think it's really important. Thank you.
So,
Chair, would you like me to respond? I got it, Travis. We appreciate the whole point of this was to bring this to the Assembly's attention. I know at multiple work sessions, the administration has brought up this issue. The CFO has repeatedly brought up this issue to keep the Assembly informed. We will continue to do that. I am not at this point going to schedule monthly meetings with the Assembly to take staff away from drilling down and getting these reimbursements done. But this might be an appropriate line item to add to the Budget and Finance Committee meeting for an update. I'd be happy to do that. But in order to prepare for this meeting, I want you to know staff probably took 4 to 5 hours just to do that. And that takes time away. It's important to do, we want to do, we will routinely do this. Maybe quarterly we can give updates, but we're happy to give those monthly updates at the Budget and Finance Committee meeting. But just scheduling an hour and a half work session every month, it's just not going to be the most productive use of our time.
Thank you, Ms. Domboski. Ms. Zalatel, any quick follow-up?
I appreciate that. Happy to, if the co-chairs of Budget and Finance are comfortable with that, but I want the detail, and that's what I'm asking for, whether that's written or otherwise. It seems to be known, and I just need to be able to refer back to it in all these different areas so that I feel like I'm fully understanding when there's challenges raised, what those challenges are. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Zalatel. Thank you, Ms. Domboski. And a final comment from Ms. Quinn Davidson before we go back to the administration.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I guess I just want to say that, we're elected by our constituents to ensure that government money is well spent and that the budget is balanced, and we need to understand this. So it may take staff time to get this information to us, but that's what the public deserves. And so I'd like to see frequent meetings on this, particularly since the administration has raised that they're very concerned about it. That to me says, wow, we really need to be paying attention and be learning and following along. So whether it's in a meeting format, which I think is important because we need to be able to ask questions, but the bare minimum, it would be helpful to have something like this slide, but all of the totals, what we've asked for, sort of all this helpful information that Alden and Travis put together, which I really appreciate. And I guess a final note, I didn't see 55 million totaled in all of these slides, so perhaps I missed something, but there might be some information missing on the slides. So I ask that next meeting, just make sure that all of the missing money is accounted for somewhere. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Quinn Davidson. And Mr. Constant, would you read your comment that you put in the chat, please?
Yeah, thank you. I understand and heard the expression that the administration is not willing to put the staff to address this concern in a manner that the Assembly is requesting. So that might require then that we provide additional funding for an Assembly team member on the finance team to ride herd over this matter for the Assembly by working closely with the administration. Because if they can't do it, we need to have this information. We can't be operating with just little bits of information at an irregular frequency that don't actually meet the mark. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. And Ms. Demboski, very quickly.
Yes, thank you. All I'll say is I'm very confused by some of these comments because the administration is not withholding information. We have proactively been telling you we've been here for less than 6 months, and I would suspect the previous acting mayor should have been on top of this. We're happy to come to you with whatever information you're asking for. If you want certain data points, we're happy to come to you at your Budget and Finance Committee meeting and bring you that information, whether it's in written form or verbally presented. So the administration in no way, shape, or form is not giving the Assembly information. I just want that clear, and I want that on the record. We've said it over and over again, and I'm at a loss as to why it's not being understood. So if I can communicate clearly, more clearly, please help me do that. If there's specific metrics that you want to see, please provide that question to us in writing, and we will do our very best to give you that information you're looking for.
Thank you, Ms. Demboski, and we are out of time. And I thank Mr. Frisk and Mr. Thurn for being here today and providing this information. And just to go back to my original point about a monthly report with specific data points, clearly we need to have some additional conversations and come to a place of understanding with what information the Assembly requires and how, we will work with the administration to get that. So thank you, all of you, for being here, and I will see you shortly at our next work session on the bond ratings. We are adjourned.